that you could make part of your future. And they're closely related as well. So we've learned that audit is about helping provide an organization with that assurance that its processes and procedures are watertight. And in doing so, it helps keep organizations safe. Now, every day when we wake up, there are chances that some things might not go according to plan. And we may have experienced a power cut, so our alarm doesn't go off for that vital interview. We may find the bus is late, meaning we don't arrive at school on time. We may find the Wi-Fi network is down, meaning we can't pull down that homework that we did from last night in the cloud. So in everybody's daily lives, there are risks that we assess and we learn to live with. But for other risks, the consequences of things going wrong mean that we take extra measures to either make sure the worst doesn't happen, or if it does, then we've got a backup plan. So we're going to let you have a go at some of this for yourselves. So let's imagine that we've booked a big trip. So I'm going to say here, it's a major holiday, and I'm going to pick California because that sounds like in a dreary British winter. California sounds pretty good to me. So your flight is at 9 a.m. tomorrow morning, and you've got the car parking booked at the airport, and you've calculated the time you need to check in with the flight, park the car, get to the airport. You need to set off from home 5 hours before your flight. So what we want you to do is type into the chat what kind of risks could mean that you are not going to make it to be sitting in first class drinking orange juice and having a nice croissant whilst the people like me are shuffling to the back of the plane. You're getting ready for your trip to California. Elaine, whilst everybody's putting things in the chat, how does this work for you when you're planning a major trip? What kind of risks go through your mind?
Well, I know I probably check whether I've got my passport about 5 times, just to keep getting it out, getting it back, just in case, because you don't want to get there and then you haven't got it, or you've left it on the side because you've been checking it and taking it in and out of the bag. The obvious one is about whether you think you're going to oversleep, because I think when you've got to get up early, isn't it? You just sort of, you don't really sleep properly and you end up waking up throughout the night. So that's always a bit of a worry, isn't it? You know, when you're going somewhere on a big trip, I think there's always a lot of things, isn't there, Ian, that you could potentially think of.
Passport is my big one, because I kind of figure out if I forget. I mean, I once went. I remember doing a trip to the States, and we arrived and unpacked at the hotel to realise that all of my shoes had been left at home. All I had were my winter boots that I'd flown in, and obviously in Florida, you don't really need to walk around in big boots like you would. I kind of figure out that most things I can sort out when I'm there, but if I don't have the passport and I don't arrive on time, no holiday.
No, and that's why they say you should split your clothes, isn't it, in the 2 different suitcases, not take all of your own stuff together, because if one goes missing, Ian, this is things we need to remember.
So the next thing is mitigating the risks, isn't there? So there are ways in which we can reduce the chances of those risks happening. And if they happen anyway, what are the things that you can do to reduce the impact of that going wrong? So sometimes there are risks that you just have to accept that are in there. So Elaine, when we're all traveling, because you and I both travel a lot for work and also in leisure time as well. What kind of things do you manage to put? We talked about like how to reduce the risk in there, but what other things do you do to make sure that holiday starts on time?
Yeah, I mean, for sure, we talked about sleeping through the alarm. I know a lot of people set many, many alarms, don't they? So that if the first one fails, at least you've got a backup. I think it's just like you say, it's just thinking ahead, isn't it? About things that, sometimes there's risks that you have to just accept. If the flight is delayed, that's not something that you can, that you've got any control over, is it really? So I think there's a number of things that sometimes are out of our control.
So there are different things you can do with risk, isn't there? Sometimes you can mitigate and you can try and reduce the likelihood of it happening. Sometimes you can do things where you reduce the impact of when it does happen. Some people can take out things like travel insurance, so that gives them some financial support. So if their flight is massively delayed for some reason, then they've got a little bit of compensation to pay for the rather expensive food and drink in an airport when you have to stay there for a while. Looking at you, Gatwick, last year, give me 5 hours, 5 hour delay for my flight to Sicily in there. But so there are different things that you can do around insuring, and then ultimately there are some things, as you say, that you just have to accept. You can't control things like the weather, that could cause flight delays and various other things like that as well. So thank you for all the comments that you put in the chat, and that's just like a simple example in our everyday lives about risk management. Now, in business, it's actually all quite similar. So, all organizations have to learn to evaluate and work constructively with risk. We can't eliminate it entirely and actually still run a business, because just having customers introduces a risk. So, you don't want to be a business that's trying to eliminate risk by just eliminating your customers. Otherwise, you have no business. So sometimes that means risks have to be accepted, but more often it's also about understanding that risk, the likelihood of something is going to happen, and then having the right mitigations either to reduce the chances it's going to happen or the damage if it should.
Yeah, and I mean, here we've got some special guests to talk to us a little bit more about the world of risk. So we've got Victoria, Francis, and Joshua who are going to join us now. Hello, guys. Thanks for joining us on the call today. So I'll start with you, Francis, then. What is risk? So how could you explain this to your friends and family?
Yeah, so like keeping it really simple. So risk is probably best described as either a decision or an action made on something where the outcome is unknown. Um, I think as it stands at the moment, we've been talking quite a lot of potentially the negative sides of risks, but actually that isn't always going to be the case either. We can have some positive sides to risk making or taking risks, but we tend to always automatically assume it's going to be negative. An example, obviously, we heard earlier from Rachel and Jess, and they were saying that their schools didn't really encourage them to look at apprenticeships and try to push them down a university path, but they took a risk. They took a risk to apply for apprenticeships and have sort of loved it. So not always risks associated to sort of bad outcomes, but keeping it simple, it's where we don't know what the outcome of that action or decision will be is a risk.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good way to describe it, definitely. And Victoria, why is risk important to organisations, do you think?
So without boring you all on the million reasons on why risk is important, you do need to understand the risk to manage and make informed decisions to kind of safeguard the future prospects of the bank in our case, but it could be, going back to Jess and Rachel, your future. So you need to understand the risk to better protect yourself for what your future looks like. We look at risk and future compliance and regulation frameworks for the bank, and that feeds into everyday activities for us. And if we don't manage or understand those risks, then we do need to hold ourselves accountable and do better in the future.
Yeah. And I mean, day to day then, Francis, just I'll come to you first. How do you go about your daily work then in your risk role?
Yeah, so the risk that going back to your T, so the risk that I'm specialising in at the moment is economic crime risk. So this is the
Right.
risk of potential money laundering. It is quite interesting. You kind of feel like you're trying to catch the bad guys. And my day-to-day role is really quite vast actually, because I'm quite deep on the T. I face off to lots of different programs, lots of different teams who are trying to manage that risk on an operational level, looking for my sort of support or guidance. Okay, this is what we're looking at. We think this might be connected to economic crime. What's your thoughts on it? How can we improve it? So every day is different, which is what I enjoy. You can never really predict where the bad guys might show up. So that's how I sort of go from day to day, facing off to different areas of the bank, looking to help and support and guide along the way to ultimately protect us as a group and the great British public, really.
Yeah. Oh, great. And Victoria, what about your role? How do you go about your daily work?
Yeah, so mine's is slightly different to Francis, although we do feed into the same type of clients that we look after. Mine's is more aligned to like the operational risk. So how many clients do we need to look after within a set period of time? How can I motivate my team to provide a good service that's painless for our clients and that protects the bank? We've got a set process that needs to be followed, but that's not going to work every single time, right? So how do I support my team to think outside the box, get it right for the client, but also for the bank? So mine's is slightly different to Francis.
Yeah, okay, that's interesting. And Francis, what sort of skills do you think would be useful for someone to have if they're thinking of a career in risk?
So I think for me, curiosity. You have to want to keep to going and to understand kind of, I imagine, what it would be like in audit. You have to be curious as to what's happening. I think patience is a massive one, because you might not get to where you need to in terms of your decision making or your thought process. I think challenging the status quo, you have to want to keep on pushing back and asking why. But for me, I think the key one is the desire to continue to learn and develop. Risks are always changing. The landscape is always changing. Again, certainly in economic crime, the criminals are always adapting to how they are trying to con us, how they are trying to launder money. So you have to try and stay one step of the game. Obviously, the world is changing, looking at different sort of technologies, AI. So you have to need to keep on wanting to learn and develop, and that's the biggest takeaway from me.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Francis. And Victoria, last question for you. What does the actual development path look like then for a person who works in risk?
So the development path for a risk apprentice can go lots of different ways. So you can go down a more specialist route, or you could go into a leadership role. So I know after myself, Elaine, you're going to ask Joshua some questions around the risk and compliance apprenticeship that he's completed. I actually completed the same role as Joshua and the same qualification that he's done. And I've utilised that experience to then progress into a leadership role, which means that I'm leading colleagues such as Joshua, and I've been in their shoes. I want to use that to inspire them, to challenge the status quo, to challenge what we're doing. Are we doing it right? Can we do it better? Or you can go down the more specialised route, which Francis has kind of spoken around, where for an example of that would be to look at transactions on accounts to see if there's anything suspicious in there. You can look at sanctions. So you can really take it a lot of different ways.
Yeah, okay. No, that's good to know that there are variable sort of routes and things. But